And we're back.
We're back?
Yes, we're back. Last we were talking about the end of the war and the celebrations that were going on.
And then, of course, my father came home. And keep in mind, he was in everything. He was one of the greatest generations. I adored my father.
How long did he get to stay with you before he had to go back into the Navy?
Not very long, because he had to go out on board ship, and he was home for maybe a month or something. And then he was on board ship, and he went out to all over the place. He went to Brazil, and I think they might have made a world around tour or something on board. I don't know what ship it was he was on.
So when he went on active duty, do you remember what month it was in 1945?
He went on active duty in 39, actually.
Oh, in 39.
From when he was up in Alaska. Well, no, not 39. Pearl Harbor. He went right away into the Navy then.
And most of his time was spent in Alaskan waters?
In the beginning, that was with the Merchant Marine.
Right.
And then
where was he when he was on Navy?
And he went to Cuba a lot.
During the war?
No, this is all before the war. This is all while he was in the Merchant Marine.
Right. Well, we'll get to that. But during the war, where was he, or did he spend? What ship was he on, and when did he spend most of his time?
He was on several ships, most of them troop transports, and he was on the type of ship, which is troop transport, where the LSTs came out of the front of it. He was on D-Day. He was in all those battles over there.
Oh, he actually delivered
right.
troops to the beaches at Omaha
right.
Beach and Utah
pilot.
Beach?
Right, and right, all the beaches and all that. He was in all that stuff that in the war over in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And then as soon as D-Day, he was shipped right over to the Pacific, but he was home for about maybe 2 weeks or something in the between.
Mm-hmm.
And then he was in all those, Tarawa, Iwo Jima, Guam, Okinawa. And at that time, he also was in the ships that had the LSTs, but he was also at one point executive officer of a hospital ship called the Benevolence.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, I think, his last ship. And then, of course, the war was over.
Did you worry about him during the war?
Oh, my mother was frantic. And he wrote, of course he wrote to her a lot, and we had a tremendous amount of letters, which my nephew has kept. My nephew was very, very fond of his grandfather, and he has them now.
Do you remember anything in particular from the letters?
I remember my father saying to my mother in the letter, "I don't know what we're going to do. These Japanese are not giving up. It's really tough." And he said, "We really need more people." And they got more men. And how they got them was seniors in high school, and my husband was one of them, were pulled right out of high school. They gave them their diplomas, but they were pulled right out of high school and put in boot camp. And that included Marines and Navy both. I don't know about the Army, but Marines and Navy both. And they were only 18. Some of them weren't even 18.
Do you remember when your husband was drafted?
I didn't know my husband then.
I know, but do you remember when he was drafted?
January of 1945.
5?
He would have January of 1945.
Right.
Because he graduated. He would have graduated in 1945 in June.
So he never finished high school?
He finished it.
Oh.
Well, yeah, they gave him their diplomas. They considered them finished.
Oh.
They needed the men. And they were so short of supplies that when he went to boot camp, and I'm trying to think where he went, I think it was someplace in Chicago, almost froze to death. They used wooden guns, carved wooden guns, because they didn't have enough guns. And he actually ended up in San Diego waiting to go overseas to the Pacific when the war ended.
Right. And we'll talk about that.
That was the
the
end of
effect
that.
The effect of that on your dad and
With
your
the
husband.
atomic bomb,
Right.
Nagasaki and Hiroshima.
Let's go back to growing up in Morristown, do you remember the elementary and middle schools you went to?
I went to Morristown Elementary School, same school my mother and my grandmother went to, same building for that matter.
Is that still standing, or that got demolished a long time
No,
ago?
that's gone. And
What was
they
the
had
name of the building? Do you remember?
Morristown Public School, I forget, number 7, I think it was numbered.
And then did you have a separate middle
And
school?
they had a science building right next to it, which also was old enough to my grandmother and mother had gone to. And then they built the high school. They had the high school when I was in kindergarten, but they made that larger. And but the high school, I spent very little time in the high school because we were traveling. But my mother, my grandmother, my mother, and of course my brother and sister, and all my relatives, all graduated. My nephew, there were 4 generations that graduated from Morristown High. And my grandmother was valedictorian, and she wanted to be a doctor, and she was brilliant. She learned to speak Spanish at the age of 78, but she wanted to be a doctor, and her parents didn't object, really, or they didn't show any objections to it. And of course, the University of Pennsylvania was now accepting women for doctors, and but it turned out he didn't mind her being a doctor. He did not want her to take the trolley from Morristown into Philadelphia. He said that was not good, and he discouraged her, and she never went as a consequence, which was a shame. But that was the nature of the generation, but it was a shame. But my grandmother was brilliant.
So how
She
many
taught
years?
my
How many
mother
years
to
did you
read.
actually spend at Morristown High School?
Pardon?
How many years did you spend at Morristown High School?
I spent 3 months of my freshman year, none of my sophomore year, all of my junior year, because that was Korea, and we had to come home, and 2 months of my senior year. So it was kind of checkered.
And it's during that time that you met my aunt, Elizabeth Shin?
Oh, I knew about her before because she taught my brother.
Oh.
My brother learned typing from her. Yeah, so I knew about her.
More
But
connections.
I didn't know.
Yeah.
I didn't know you were related, of
Right.
course, and I didn't know
Me,
about that. I knew that she didn't drive, and she always took a bus to Burlington. I did see her doing that, waiting at the bus stop.
Oh, I didn't know that. What do you remember about civic events in Morristown when you were growing up? Did they have, of course, 4th of July parades and
Oh, we
Memorial Day
had wonderful
parades?
4th of July parades. But see, there again, in my teen years, I was not in Morristown very much at
Right.
all. But we had a wonderful library. It's still there, but it's not a library. It's a community house that
Eldridge Johnson.
Johnson. What was his first name?
Eldridge.
Eldridge Johnson
Donated,
and built in 1926. And there's pictures of the library taken very early, and one of them is of the children's book section of the whole library, which was on the right-hand side facing the building. And it happens to have some children in there sitting on the floor reading, and the children, but 3 of them was us, my brother, my sister, and me.
How about that?
It's in the hallway of the
Do you
Center.
remember going to any other events besides parades? Did they have fireworks?
We went to fireworks at Riverton.
Riverton.
Riverton had wonderful fireworks.
How about sporting events? Did you go to football games or
no.
basketball games? No? Not interested in that?
I'm not interested in sports at all. I think it's disgraceful that a person who cannot speak a grammatically correct sentence should make so much money.
Well, in high school, what were your extracurricular activities?
Well, I was in high school so little at Morristown High. I really didn't have any.
You didn't write for the newspaper or anything
no,
like that?
We moved around so much. So I went to 5 different high schools in 4 years. And you don't get too, well, I will say this. In my sophomore year, I was at Daly City High School in Daly City, California. And I was involved in the theater part of that because I was there for the whole year.
What did you do?
Well, we had I was not fat, but I was tall, 5'8", and I'm a rather large frame. And we had put on the King and I musical. And I, of course, was never picked because all these little dinky girls got all picked. But I helped with the dance part where they, this business.
So you were kind of in the chorus and the dance parts of the play?
I just helped and sort of invented it because the teacher came up to me later and said, that was wonderful. I mean, I showed them how to do their neck and all that because I love to dance. And I went to every prom you can imagine, I'm telling you. It could have been Santa Claus. I would have gone to a prom with
So
somebody.
you went to a high school in Daly City. Where else did you go to high school?
I went to high school in Alameda, California, very short while. And then and of course I homeschooled it when I went overseas. And then I went to the American high school in Tsingtao when we were there in China. So, and it worked out okay. Now, but then when my father came home from the war, now we're going to be back to the war. I want to tell why my father was a ship's pilot and
Okay.
why he named me my first name.
Okay, wait a second.